Listen to this and write it down if you can't remember it. You're never going to outgrow warfare. You simply must learn to fight. I hear people saying to me all the time, when is it going to get easier? When you die.
Can I help you? Hello, it's February 2022, and I've talked, especially recently, but over the years as well, how things need to be exaggerated or sensationalized to get people's attention. And this is a huge problem because through exaggeration and sensationalism, reality becomes so skewed where even reality fiction replaces reality. And where we see this as a really big problem, for example, when an exaggeration or something that's been sensationalized is based on a lie. And this, for example, leads into false accusations and people being wrongfully convicted deliberately, and sometimes not, and impacting people's lives. Not just the person being accused, for example, but everyone in their lives. And a big part of why things need to be exaggerated or sensationalized in today's world is because people have become desensitized to, for example, violence, nudity, sexuality. Pick a topic. We've all been desensitized to it. And a lot of these things, there's a reverse psychology being imposed where people are being desensitized through the promotion of violence, sexuality, nudity, and whatever. And I'm not saying there's anything wrong with nudity or sexuality, but people have become desensitized to these things. So what has happened in society through being desensitized is their tolerance for example, these examples I just said, to anything. I've been kind of focusing a little bit on the channel Blackpilled by Devon Stack, and you can find him on other social media groups, and he even does live streams and so forth. So, I suggest you find him and check him out. And the videos that I've been kind of going over, reviewing, highlighting, I guess you want to call it, they're about 2-3 years old. And a lot of the things that he's talked about, I've talked about years and years prior. His delivery is a lot different than mine, and it's just a different way of expressing kind of the same message. Now, basically there's really two videos that I want to focus on in this video about tolerance. And he talks about how high is your tolerance. And he focuses on, for example, music, a type of music. And he references one specific group. And he talks about how this music makes them feel good, or makes people feel good. And he can relate to that. And I have to say, what he's saying is true, because it does make you, or people who are drawn towards that music, makes you feel good. And it's kind of like a drug. And I've said a lot how music, just like emotions, whether it be love or hate or anger or whatever, or even drugs or alcohol or anything else, skews perceptions. And the more of these things that you take in, the more that you need. And the more that you need, the more skewed reality becomes. And it's just a vicious circle. And he talks about, he uses music. So I'm going to kind of build off of those two videos of his. And I'm going to expand on this even further. And I've talked about this, as I said before in other videos, how people have become desensitized. Everything has to be exaggerated and sensationalized. Now, how this ties into, for example, with his videos and this topic, really has to do with things that are being presented to the people. Now, if you go back, for example, to the 1940s, 1950s, You include the 1930s. The fears and propaganda and everything else that was being presented to people were, compared to today, very subtle. And these things were, how should I put it, very toned down. And we see a progression over time where all these things had to be heightened more and more because people become desensitized. We have a little break. Something else is presented to the people. A little bit more graphic, a little bit more harder, a little bit more sensationalized, exaggerated. And setting aside whether they be true events or not, that's not the point. The point is everything has to be exaggerated and sensationalized more and more to the extreme. And this ties in, for example, with current worldwide events, how something was being presented as real, and it just had to be really sensationalized and exaggerated, whether it's a lie or not. Again, that's not the point of this. So now we see a point where I've said when this began in 2020, this is going to write itself out. And I've told people to survive, endure until this phase of this pattern of the late stage of the last stage of civilization, the stage of decadence, runs its course. And now we're starting to see it slowly kind of running its course on its own. And all the efforts people have done and made things worse and everything else didn't make things happen any slower or faster. It just, things have to run its course. But now what we're seeing, for example, now that this phase is kind of going through its latter half of whatever it needs to do, we're starting to see other things being presented. For example, in mainstream media and a lot of people in alternative media. And what I'm talking about really applies to people who follow mainstream and people who follow alternative. But I really want to focus on people who follow alternative. I really want these people to pay attention, because there's this addiction that's going on, and I've talked about this in previous videos. So now they're coming up with, for example, we had the Rittenhouse. I've briefly talked about the Rittenhouse case and how he's going to sue, and it's mind-numbing how many armchair legal experts with opinions or beliefs, which differs to knowing, are saying, oh yeah, he's going to win it big. And these people don't even have any law background whatsoever. But that's beside the point. For one thing, he needs to, for example, prove damages. People will say, well, yeah, but he's not getting into university, or he's not getting the jobs that he wants, or whatever. Yeah, but he still has to prove that what other people have said, whether it was before he was exonerated or not, had impacted his life, and he has to prove those damages. It's not, to the layperson, it might seem very clear cut and dry, but it's not. And time will tell what's going to happen with these cases. Now I want to interject real quick here about, I've talked about advocates like lawyers and agents, and I've talked about police, their roles in the whole judicial system. And I'm just really going to briefly say a judge's role, and judges again are lawyers who simply have another governing body to answer to be a judge. I'm simplifying it a lot. A judge's role is to be a gatekeeper of information, and which includes, for example, determining what would the court, a judge, consider, for example, as hearsay evidence. Every testimony is hearsay evidence. Lay people think that there's some magical formula that distinguishes it. When somebody says something, a judge will either say that's hearsay or not, but whatever. And I'm set aside any biases or agendas by the courts, or political interference, for example, things like that will help determine what is or isn't hearsay or evidence, etc. So I just wanted to segue that in real quick for a moment. Now, with this whole thing with the Rittenhouse, now we have this other distraction happening here, on this side. Again, I'm not saying whether he was right or wrong with what happened. He had a lot of wrongs done to him, and that's all I'm going to say with that, but whatever. I'm not going to go down that path. So we have this distraction. Now we have this distraction that's happening with as a descriptive, former Soviet Union and another small country, which is kind of part of it, and what's going on there with the military and everything else. A lot of people are talking about this, and fear is setting in, and is this going to start, and what are these other countries, for example, who make these cheap Chinese diesel heaters, what are they going to do, and all this other stuff. They're feeding more, so they're backing off on this worldwide fear that's been going on for 2 years. Now they're starting to introduce other fears, and it's basically pick your flavor of fear. And because people's tolerance has been over decades, and even the past, say, 20 years, 10 years, 5 years, has increased so much to all this stuff, they have to really sensationalize, exaggerate, and whether it's based on something true or not, that's beside the point. A lot of people are relying on the very same, for example, mainstream media for information with these new things that are coming up. Oh, well, look at what's happening now, forgetting that, for an example, mainstream media, as well as alternative media, have been luring people with falsehoods or whatever, exaggerations, sensationalism. And so people are buying into it. So it's just more flavors now on the table for people to choose from. And it's really mind-numbing to kind of try to wrap your head around all this stuff, because people are buying into more fear. Now, why I want to focus on people in the alternative media world, which includes people, for example, who call themselves truthers, or truth seekers, or even the free man on the land types, people who do protests by rubber or by foot, whatever. There's an addiction, and I've highlighted this in other videos, for this type of negativity. And whether it be mainstream or alternative, it's two different sides of the same things that are being presented. And I've said this, and I don't mean this as disrespect, but I have to highlight this so people, and if it triggers anyone, I'll get over it. But one side's calling the other side sheeple. They don't see that they're being the sheeple themselves, because they're buying into another side of a story. And the smart people, the people who see this, they're sitting in the middle going, yeah, both sides are skewing facts and not seeing things clearly, etc. They're seeing what they want to see. And I've said this before, where truthers are not interested in truth. They're interested in what they want the truth to be. So both sides are being fed. So I guess it's just to sum everything up real quick, going back to tolerance and Devon Stack's Black Pill videos on this topic, where he focuses on music, but it could be expanded to everything. People are being drawn in. They're having their addictions fulfilled on both sides. The mainstream, we'll call it, and the alternative, we'll call it. And they don't see it. Now, the problem is the people who are on the alternative side are not doing themselves or anyone any favors by reacting. I've said many times, if you're free, act free. I'm not stating or implying what people should say, think, or do. or even what that means. But some people get it. You know, if you're free, act free. It doesn't necessarily state or imply, doesn't state or imply violence or anything else. It just, you know, whatever. That's leave that on you to have your own interpretation. But I just wanted to make that part clear. So just be careful. With now, there's going to be more and more things being presented to cause different fears, and then there's going to be they're going to resurrect old fears and just kind of keep everyone hopping. The smart ones are standing firm on the ground going, hey, the world's not spinning, so what's all the hype about, right? Anyway, that's all I want to say. Things to think about. Thank you for watching. Please like, subscribe, comment, and share. What goes around comes around.